My name is Clara Whitmore, and for most of my life, I believed the word family meant the people whose blood matched yours. I was wrong. Family is who opens the door when everyone else locks it. Family is who holds your children when your hands are shaking too badly to hold anything. Family is who stays before the money, before the applause, before the world decides you are worth loving. When my husband died, I was 32 years old with twin babies and a bank account so empty, the grocery store felt like a courtroom. I drove through an ice storm to my parents' estate, carrying both children in blankets, and begged for help. My mother looked at me as if poverty were contagious. My father said I needed to learn responsibility. Then they closed the door. 7 years later, those same parents sat in a room full of lawyers, donors, and local reporters, watching me sign away $29 million to the people they had always called beneath us. My mother's champagne glass trembled. My father forgot to blink. And my brother, the golden son, whispered the question that made the whole room turn silent. Clara, why would you give that much to them? I smiled, because the answer had been waiting inside me for 7 years. Because they came when you didn't. Before I tell you how my parents tried to steal the ranch I built from nothing, tell me where you are watching from. And if you have ever been betrayed by the people who were supposed to protect you, stay with me. Somewhere in this story is the moment I learned that revenge is not always loud. Sometimes revenge is simply rewarding the right people while the wrong ones watch. If this story sounds familiar, do not rush past it. There is another episode on this channel about a daughter who was cut from the will, then bought the hospital that saved her child. Watch that one after this, because it connects to the same lesson. People who measure your worth by your usefulness should never be allowed to spend your future. And as you listen, notice every small nail they leave behind. The folder, the lien, the $100, the word emotional. None of those details are accidents. When someone hurts you for years, they rarely fall because of one huge mistake. They fall because their small cruelties finally line up like evidence. So stay until the end. The final document I showed in that barn did not just expose a lie. It explained why my mother had hated Meadowbrook from the first day she heard its name. And that truth changed everything before dessert was even cleared. Remember this, because it matters near the ending. The dinner invitation arrived on thick cream paper, delivered by courier, because my mother believed even apologies should look expensive. It was for the annual Langford family winter dinner at my parents' house in Greenwich. The house sat behind black iron gates, with stone lions at the driveway and windows so tall they made guests feel small before they even stepped inside. I almost declined. My twins, Noah and Nora, were 9 now, old enough to ask why their grandparents sent birthday cards but never visited, old enough to notice when people smiled without warmth. But I wanted them to know the truth for themselves. I wanted to stop carrying a story they had never witnessed, so I dressed them carefully. Noah wore a navy sweater. Nora wore a silver headband shaped like tiny stars. I wore a plain black dress, because I had learned not to compete with my mother's stage. Inside, the dining room looked exactly as I remembered. Crystal glasses, white orchids, silver candles, polished mahogany, and relatives arranged like decoration. My mother, Margaret Langford, sat at the head of the table with perfect posture and cold pearls at her throat. My father, Edmund, folded his newspaper even though dinner had already begun. My younger brother, Julian, leaned back in his chair, smiling like a man born expecting forgiveness. The strange part was that everyone was too polite. That was the first nail. My aunt asked about the weather. My cousin complimented Nora's headband. My father mentioned interest rates. Nobody asked about the ranch. Nobody asked why I had been invited, after years of silence. Nobody mentioned the $88 million offer that had appeared in 2 business columns that week. But I felt it in the room. They knew. Halfway through dinner, just before dessert, my mother reached beside her chair and lifted a leather folder onto the table. The sound was soft, but it cut through the room harder than a slap. Clara, she said, we should handle this before the children get tired. Noah looked up from his roll. Nora stopped swinging her feet. I touched her knee under the table. My mother opened the folder and slid a stack of papers toward me. Your father and I have discussed this with counsel. Julian is prepared to take management control of Meadowbrook Ranch. You will remain associated with the brand, of course, in a charitable capacity. I stared at her. A charitable capacity? Julian chuckled. Don't be dramatic. You're good with horses and sad people. I'm good with growth, the second nail. I looked down at the documents. Transfer of controlling interest, immediate operating authority, compensation to be determined after restructuring. My ranch, my program, my land, my children's future reduced to legal language and Julian's lazy signature line. My father cleared his throat. The offer on the ranch is substantial. We believe it is time an adult handled it properly. On Aduit. 7 years earlier, when my husband, Daniel, was killed by a distracted truck driver on Route 9, I learned what adults looked like. Adults did not sit behind mahogany tables discussing optics. Adults showed up at hospitals. Adults paid funeral deposits. Adults held screaming babies while their mother signed death certificates. My parents had sent flowers. White lilies, because my mother considered them tasteful. After the funeral, the bills arrived faster than sympathy. Medical costs, attorney fees, rent, formula, heating oil. Daniel had left love, but not enough insurance. I called my mother first because some foolish, bruised part of me still believed daughters were allowed to ask. She did not answer, so I drove there. The snow was so thick that night my windshield wipers sounded like bones scraping glass. Noah and Nora were 6 months old, bundled in thrift store blankets. I parked beneath the stone lions and carried both car seats to the front door. My father opened it only halfway. Behind him, I saw the fire burning in the marble fireplace. I smelled roast chicken. I heard Julian laughing at a television show in the den. Dad, I said, I need help. He looked at the babies, then at me. How much? 3,000, maybe 4. Just until I can get steady work again. The heat is overdue. I'm scared. My mother appeared behind him, holding a wine glass. She looked beautiful. That made it worse. Clara, you chose to marry Daniel, she said. We warned you he had no real prospects. He died, I whispered. And now you have consequences. Those words lived inside me longer than grief. My father reached for his wallet. For one dizzy second, I thought he would help. He pulled out $100 and placed it on top of Noah's blanket. Use it wisely, he said. Then he closed the door. That week, thens. If you are still listening, remember that number. $250,000 for a son's fantasy. $100 for a widowed daughter with 2 freezing babies. Later, that exact contrast would break my mother's perfect mask in front of everyone. I did not call them again. I called Daniel's parents, Ruth and Samuel Bennett. They lived 3 hours away in a farmhouse with peeling blue shutters and a kitchen table scarred by 40 years of ordinary meals. Samuel answered on the second ring. I tried to speak, but all that came out was a sound I did not recognize. Where are you? He asked. Outside my parents' house. We're coming. No lecture, no questions, no calculation. By dawn, Samuel was loading the babies into his truck while Ruth wrapped me in a quilt that smelled like lavender and wood smoke. At their house, she made oatmeal because it was warm and cheap. Samuel fixed the furnace in the spare room. They gave me the bed and slept on the pull-out sofa for 3 months. They were not wealthy. Samuel repaired tractors. Ruth worked part-time at a library. They did not have a trust fund, a guest house, or a financial advisor. They had hands that worked and hearts that did not keep score. When I found the first version of Meadowbrook, it was not a ranch. It was 12 acres of neglected pasture, a leaning barn, and 3 rescue horses nobody wanted. The owner agreed to a lease-to-own arrangement because Samuel fixed his equipment for free. Ruth watched Noah and Nora while I cleaned stalls, studied equine therapy, wrote grant applications, and cried in the feed room where the horses could not judge me. For years, I smelled like hay, sweat, antiseptic, and baby shampoo. I drove a truck with 1 working headlight. I cut my own hair. I learned how to calm a panicked veteran by placing his hand on a horse's shoulder. I watched a silent child speak her first sentence to a gray mare named Sunday. I watched broken people trust again because animals had no interest in family reputations. Slowly, Meadowbrook became known, then respected, then valuable. A national wellness foundation approached me with an expansion plan. They wanted to purchase Meadowbrook, preserve the therapy program, hire my staff, and build 3 more centers under the same model. The offer was $88 million. When the lawyer said the number aloud, I did not feel rich. I felt safe. That is a different thing. Back in my parents' dining room, my mother tapped the transfer papers with one manicured nail. "You should be grateful," she said. "We are keeping this inside the family." I looked toward the sunroom where Noah and Nora were now playing chess with an elderly uncle who had never learned how to mind his business. "The family?" I asked. Julian leaned forward. "Don't start that emotional nonsense." There it was. The third nail. Emotional. That was what they called pain when it belonged to someone else. I pushed the papers back. "No." My father's face hardened. "Clara." "No," I repeated. "Meadowbrook is not yours. It is not Julian's. It was built by people you considered beneath you." My mother's smile thinned. "Be careful." Julian slid his phone across the table. On the screen was a legal notice. "Alien. Filed against Meadowbrook Ranch." My chest tightened, but I kept my face still. Julian watched me with pleasure. "Old family contributions. Documentation pending." My mother folded her hands. "Until this is resolved, the foundation may reconsider its purchase timeline. But if you cooperate, we can make this unpleasantness disappear." The fourth nail. They had not invited me to dinner. They had invited me to a hostage negotiation. For a moment, I wanted to scream loud enough to shake the orchids from their vases. Then I remembered Samuel's voice, during the hardest years. "Never wrestle a pig in front of clean people. Let the pig run across the carpet." So I lowered my eyes. "What do you want?" I whispered. Julian smiled fully. My mother relaxed. My father exhaled as if order had returned to the universe. "We want controlling interest," Julian said. 40% for the family, operational authority for me, and a public statement crediting the Langford family for Meadowbrook's success. I almost admired the greed. Almost. "I need time," I said. "You have 24 hours, my father replied. I nodded, gathered Noah and Nora, and left before dessert. In the car, Nora asked, "Mom, why was Grandma angry?" I gripped the steering wheel. "Because sometimes people get angry when they cannot take what isn't theirs." Noah stared out the window. "Are they going to take the horses?" "No," I said. "Not one." That night, after the twins fell asleep, I called my attorney, Alina Park. Alina was the kind of woman who could make silence feel expensive. I sent her the lien notice. She called back 9 minutes later. "This is sloppy," she said. "Dangerous but sloppy. Can they delay the sale?" "Yes. Unless we get them to admit there was no documented loan." "How?" "Let greedy people sign things." The next morning, I called my mother and made my voice small. "I'm scared," I said. "I know," she answered, and I could hear victory blooming in her throat. "I'll discuss Julian's proposal, but the foundation's lawyers need clarity. If there is a real loan, they need documentation. If there is not, they need a temporary release to keep negotiations alive." My mother was quiet. "Send it." Alina drafted a document so clean it looked harmless. It asked the lien claimants to confirm, for the purposes of preliminary negotiation, that no written loan agreement, mortgage, promissory note, or investment contract existed between the Langford family and Meadowbrook Ranch. Julian signed first. My father signed second. My mother signed last, adding a note in the margin. "We expect Clara to act reasonably after this accommodation." Reasonably. The fifth nail. Alina filed the emergency motion that afternoon. By Friday, the court dissolved the lien. By Monday, the sale closed. $88 million transferred into escrow, then into accounts arranged for taxes, staff bonuses, Noah and Nora's education, and one decision nobody in my family saw coming. This is where I need you to pay attention, because this is the part most people get wrong. I did not want revenge that burned everything down. I wanted a mirror. I wanted my parents to see exactly what they had purchased with their cruelty and exactly what Ruth and Samuel had earned with their kindness. So I invited everyone to Meadowbrook for what I called a legacy dinner. My parents came. Of course they came. Margaret wore emerald silk. Edmund wore a black suit. Julian arrived in a borrowed sports car and parked where the photographers would see it. They thought the dinner meant I had accepted that money belonged near power. They did not notice Ruth and Samuel arriving in Samuel's old brown pickup. Ruth stepped out carefully, smoothing the front of her navy dress. She looked nervous. Samuel wore the same gray jacket he had worn to Daniel's funeral. When he saw the lights strung across the barn, the white tables, the donors, the lawyers, the staff, the reporters, and the children running between hay bales, he looked at me and whispered, "Clara, what have you done?" I took his hand. Something overdue. During dinner, I let my mother wait. That was another nail. She kept glancing at the podium, then at me, then at Julian. My father checked his watch. Julian drank too much wine. Finally, I stood. "Thank you for coming to Meadowbrook," I said. "Many of you know the sale closed this week. The program will expand, the horses will remain protected, and every staff member will receive a retention bonus." Applause rose. I waited. But tonight is not about a sale. It is about the people who made this place possible. My mother lifted her chin. She thought I meant her. That almost made me laugh. 7 years ago, I continued, after my husband died, I stood outside a house with my infant twins and begged for help. I was turned away. That same week, $250,000 was given to someone else for a business that never opened. A murmur moved through the barn. My mother went still. Julian's fork froze above his plate. I did not look at them yet. Then 2 people drove through a snowstorm to get us. They gave us a room. They gave us food. They gave us childcare, labor, dignity, and love. They never asked for credit. They never asked for repayment. Ruth began shaking her head, already crying. I turned toward her and Samuel. "Tonight, I am creating the Ruth and Samuel Bennett Healing Foundation with an initial gift of $29 million. The room exploded in applause. Samuel did not move. Ruth covered her mouth with both hands. Noah and Nora ran to them, and suddenly the 4 of them were holding one another as if the money had knocked the years loose. Then Julian stood. "$29 million?" he said too loudly. "You gave $29 million to them?" Every camera turned. My mother whispered, "Sit down." But he did not. "They are not even your real parents," he snapped. The room died. There it was, the final nail, hammered by his own mouth. I turned slowly. "You're right, Julian. They are not my real parents. They are better." My father stood. "This is inappropriate." "Inappropriate," I said, "was filing a false lien against a therapy ranch because you wanted control of money you did not earn." Alina stepped to the projector. The screen behind me lit up. First, the lien. Then the signed admission that no loan documents existed. Then the court order dissolving the claim. Then bank records showing the $250,000 sent to Julian the same week I received $100 on a baby blanket. Someone gasped. My mother's face drained of color. For the first time in my life, Margaret Langford looked small inside a beautiful dress. I looked at the room. I used to think abandonment was an ending. It was not. It was a direction. My parents pushed me away, and because of that, I found the people who knew how to love without an invoice. My father grabbed my mother's arm. "We are leaving." No one stopped them. That was the quietest justice of all. Not shouting, not chasing, not begging to be understood. Just watching them walk out while everyone else stayed. Later, after the reporters left and the candles burned low, Ruth found me beside Sunday's stall. She touched my cheek like I was still the terrified widow she had carried home. "You gave us too much," she said. "No," I answered. "You gave me a life. I gave you a name on a building." Samuel wiped his eyes with the back of his hand and pretended dust had caused it. Noah leaned against me. Nora held Ruth's hand. For the first time, my children saw the whole shape of the truth. Not the polished version. Not the polite version. The real one. My parents had blood. Ruth and Samuel had shown up. And when life finally handed me the power to choose, I chose the people who had chosen me when I had nothing. So if you are watching this after being abandoned, rejected, or made to feel like a burden, listen carefully. The people who leave you in the storm do not get to own the shelter you build afterward. My parents abandoned me and my twins. Then they watched me give away $29 million to the only family that ever acted like one. And if you want to know what Julian did 3 months later, when his debts finally caught up with him and he showed up at my gate in the rain, watch the next story, because that night, he learned that forgiveness and access are not the same thing.